Good morning, LinkedIn Live. We are live finally. Sorry, we're a little bit late. It's my fault. I went out for a walk and then had to do something with my face. And so, good morning, everyone. Good morning, Elaine, and thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So, if you're listening live and on a Friday morning here in the UK, the sun is shining just about. I hope you've all had a really good week. This is going to be amazing conversation. We're talking about the difference between positive action and positive discrimination, which I think is quite timely because I saw a post. My understanding is the latest acronym that's being used for DEI is didn't earn it. So I think this discussion is very timely, actually. So Elaine, thank you again so much for joining me because I know that you're incredibly busy. So for those that don't know, please do check out Elaine's profile. If you've got any comments, say good morning if you're joining us live. And if you've got any questions, also put those in the comments. But we're going to be talking about positive action versus positive discrimination. So Elaine, I'm going to read out a bit of her bio. There isn't long enough really to read all of Elaine's bio, but Elaine is an employment equality, discrimination and human rights barrister. So her practice includes disciplinary, regulatory, sports law and stress at work. Gosh, I feel like we all need a bit of help when it comes to that. Elaine's has been, you've won so many things, right? Times Lawyer of the Week, Lawyer Hot 100, I quite like the sound of, as a result of, some of the really high profile cases, which I think we maybe we'll get into one of them, featured as the Lawyer's Barrister of the Week in November 2021. You write for lots of publications and you've been featured on various programs, BBC's Panorama Sky, LBC, Channel 4, in the Times, and also you sit on a number of boards. And this bit I found quite interesting as well. And I don't know how you find time for it all actually, but I know on here some of the boards, included, co-chair of the Bars Council, chair of the board of Tallowa Theatre, Go Tallowa, and a member of Sadler's Wells Development Council, and a bencher at Middle Temple. And then you've got a landmark case going on at the moment. But I think where we're going to start is, and good morning Sophia, good morning Laura as well. Thank you for joining us. We're going to start with what's a favourite case that you've worked on, Elaine?
It's such a difficult and interesting question, but I think one that really exemplifies a whole stream of my work is the case of Rajput versus Commerzbank, which was the one that last year I was featured as Times Lawyer of the Week. And that was a really good recognition of a case that's been going on for over 8 years. And what was so unique about it was that my client, we actually won the case twice. We won it, it was appealed, then part of it was remitted back to the tribunal, and we won it again. And then she had remedy, which was dealing with pre-dismissal losses, and then it was featured. And it went global in that sense now, as things do when they're featured in the Times online. And it was just shining a light on, a stream of work, like I said, I've done for years, which I say women with the audacious plan of having a baby, going back to work, maybe trying to get promoted even. And it is still a complex space to navigate for a lot of women. So it was nice that it had that recognition.
Yeah, one of the quotes that I quite liked about it is this woman in this case, this Rajput and Commerzbank, she was described as having an unhealthy obsession with work after coming back to work after being on maternity leave. Says it all, doesn't it? Really says it all. Okay, so Elaine, honestly, I can't thank you enough, because this topic, I think particularly around the work of D&I, so what I've been saying to people, and I know a lot of the people that are going to be tuning into this are, HR leads, recruiters, so people that are involved in that field of work, people that are running employee networks, etc., that do often have either schemes or recruitment initiatives or whatever that target a specific group. How do they make sure that they stay on the right side of the law? And obviously we've also had an increase in cases now. I'm kind of calling them reverse discrimination cases. I don't know if that's the right term, but things like the RAF, here in the UK, and we're seeing it a lot in the States, I feel, as well. So I'm sure we're going to be seeing it more in the UK. So massive topic. But so kick us off, Elaine, with some definitions. Like, let's get into legals. I almost feel as though I should have had my glasses on for today, but let's get us into the legals in terms of the definitions first.
Absolutely.
What is positive action? Just explain that for us.
Well, positive action, if you think of it as a shield rather than a sword, so the provisions protect employers in what they want to do, i.e. to bring a scheme in, a process, a scheme to ameliorate disadvantage in respect of particular protected characteristics. So, for example, what you need as an employer, you might have evidence of, and you need evidence. It doesn't have to be like complicated, sophisticated statistical analysis, but you do need to have evidence so that if you were challenged, you can demonstrate a real need. So what you need is to identify a group that suffer a disadvantage connected to a protected characteristic under the Equality Act, such as age, sex, race, disability, that sort of thing, and that there are difference in the needs because of that protected characteristic, and that the participation of that group is disproportionately low. So if you have all of those things in place, then you can make your scheme. And you can have a training scheme, you can invite people to apply, you can encourage people to apply from particular groups. And so you can have a sort of, you can have the mentorship schemes, vacation schemes, all those sorts of schemes that you've probably seen. That's why they are lawful. And that's Section 158 of the Equality Act 2010. But Section 159 is the one that's often referred to as well, which is the tie-break provision. So that's where you also can show that disadvantage that I talked about. You can show that difference, and then you can then apply it to recruitment or promotion, i.e. where two candidates are equal, you could appoint the one who's from the underrepresented group suffering disadvantage. Now, how do you show if two people are equal? That can be the kicker there, because that can be, it's not all scientific, is it? There's human judgment. But I think that's also why employers are sometimes a bit frightened of that one. But there's those are two provisions. Section 159 is purely in the workplace. Section 158 is more general, and you sometimes see, for example, in sports centres, this is the morning for the pensioners or, whatever. Get those. So for goods and services, it can be used in that way as well. And that also annoys people, and people get confused by that.
Do you know, it's so interesting, because I literally, a colleague of mine that I used to work with, who is now a dear friend of mine, she literally WhatsApped me a couple of days ago and said, have I come across positive action in terms of service delivery? And I sort of said, I don't think I have. And I was Googling around, and I said, I've only seen it in the context of employment. And she sort of said, oh, I'm sure there's something about it in service delivery. So this is exactly what you're talking about. That's amazing.
It means that you can get those spaces set aside for particular groups. And people, I've been involved in cases, people have been very cross about it, but it's mainly they lack the understanding.
So I've got a question, and Jill's put a question here, Jill Cook, which is there a takeaway we could please use or share which outlines a summary of 158 and 159, maybe even just in this chat? Thank you. There are potentially a couple of links, or and I know that there are a couple of links that I've often gone to, which is just literally on the government websites of 158 and 159, that we could potentially share, I think, Elaine, maybe after this.
This in the chat. It's not all of it, it's just part of 158 outline. But we could absolutely do that. I mean, you can Google at Google or look it up, as opposed to say,
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
teenage you can find a lot about it online.
Yeah.
I think the
Yeah.
main thing is that you're looking to make change. I always think of it as ameliorating disadvantage.
Mhm.
You're ameliorating disadvantage, which is quite deep rooted, that word systemic, and it's a way of, breaking down those barriers.
Yeah.
That's really what it's there to do.
Yeah. Could
People
I just
are very reticent. Generally, there's a lot of misunderstanding around it that
yeah.
puts people off.
Yeah. Could I just probe as well that this thing about the disadvantage? Can you give some examples of that? As in, does it have to be, can it almost be like does it have to be an individual level, in terms of thinking about 158 versus 159, or actually can it be broader than that? Do you know what I mean? Like, how is it kind of measured or assessed, that
Well,
level of disadvantage?
so it depends on so if it's, say, a workplace provision, then you're looking at, you might be looking, say if it's in London, you might be looking at London, you might be looking at Birmingham, you might be looking at that industry, you might be looking at architects, you might be, so you can, as long as you can demonstrate that disadvantage on a rational basis that stands up to scrutiny,
Okay.
you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
so you want to have it, I think you can have it on a wider scale, but you also want to have it on a more smaller scale, smaller level as well for an employer. It's just going to give more insulation. And so, for example, you might see, and I've certainly seen adverts of, we're encouraging women to apply to become, fire engineers, working fire stations, firefighters, that sort of thing. So generally, you can imagine there's probably less women doing that work than men. And so a scheme that's going to ameliorate that and deal with that underrepresented group is going to be proportionate, because you're looking, it's that word of proportionality. It's one of the buzzwords. So the scheme needs to be proportionate in respect of the disadvantage and disparity.
Right.
Now,
Okay.
where people often get themselves twisted up is they're confusing lawful, and I always say lawful positive action, compared to positive discrimination, unlawful positive discrimination. And one way of thinking about it is positive discrimination being quotas, more like quotas. Now, that is something that is unlawful unless you have specific, for example, when Labour Party had all women shortlists, that was a specific act which gave them permission to do that. That otherwise is an unlawful quota. And so people often get positive action mixed up with positive discrimination or quotas, and they're not the same. And another thing to think about is targets, which are completely lawful, they're getting them mixed up with quotas. What is a target? Well, something that you have, you can have all this data, but if you're not measuring yourself against something, as an employer, how do you know if you're improving in the workplace? Well, you can do so by setting a target, being intentional, measuring your progress. Have you reached that target? If you haven't, why haven't you? That is completely lawful. In fact, it's recommended that you have something tangible to work towards rather than just something floating around in the air.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a question about, you mentioned the specific, I guess, almost like dispensation that Labour had when they were pulling together all female shortlists. Because some work that I've done with exec search and exec recruiters, there is a lot of, often they're taking a brief from a client for very senior positions particularly, and the clients are saying things like, we want a woman in this role, especially like board, there's a lot of pressure to hit board targets, so some clients are literally saying, we want a woman. So let's come back to that. Let's pick up Georgina's question first though, which is, what about general inclusion statements on job ads that list many protected characteristics encouraging applicants? I mean, I guess that is fine, right?
Absolutely fine if you can demonstrate that there's an underrepresentation, there's a disadvantage that you're seeking to ameliorate, and you're using a proportionate methodology, you're going to be fine. And that encouraging to apply is actually quite a soft touch. It's not a particular scheme that's geared towards it. You know, it's just, we want more applications. And I know from the work that I do, employers will sometimes say people just aren't applying. So guess what? You need to go out there and tell them we want you to apply. So that encouraging to apply is quite a, you know, I'd say quite a basic step.
Yeah. So let's come back to this thing of, so if, you know, if, for example, so if we've got any recruiters watching and they get a client, and, you know, and internal resources might get the same thing, and particularly say, for example, for board level positions, because there are these targets that are out there, you know, and it's now increasing in terms of ethnicity as well, you know, with the Parker review. So when they're, you know, they're taking a brief and the, you know, the CEO or whoever says, I want an all woman shortlist, what should they be saying to that person internally?
Well, they can encourage people to apply. That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. They can even have like a training, mentoring scheme that is targeting. If you can demonstrate that there's that disadvantage, and you're taking those reasonable, proportionate steps to ameliorate that, then it depends how you couch it, because you know, you can't just saying I want a woman could be more favorable treatment. So that's not the language, a lexicon that I'm not going to advise that you adopt that lexicon at all.
We want one of those. We shouldn't be using that language.
Because that is where it might be going beyond that shield. Think of it as a shield, not a sword. If it starts to become a sword, then it may be open to challenge. In my experience, not many cases where it's challenged successfully, actually. It's used, I think, less often. And I think it's all about giving people the information and education to realize that they can use it. So they might have, you know, a desire to get more diversity, say for women, which is fine. But they can encourage, they can do all of that to training, mentorship, encourage, do the scheme, and then they can use at the point of appointment the tie break.
The tie break, which is section 159, right?
Section 159, which again, in my experience, is underused. People are a little bit scared of it, and you can understand why. Because it can be misinterpreted as a quota. So that's why you don't use language of we want to move. And there's lots of initiatives, you know, obviously, like you said, with the Parker Review, with FTSE 100, FTSE 500, trying to get more women, and there have been some strides made, still more work to be done and all the rest of it. But yes, we do need to always think about that word proportionality is helpful.
And just in terms of the disadvantage and the underrepresentation, is underrepresentation it's in itself almost sufficient to prove that there is disadvantage, or does there need to be something else? Do you know what I mean? I know that. So if, for example, say you're in a firm, you know, you're in, so say you're in a London law firm, say, and you know, we know what the you know, the ethnicity sort of gender makeup is, and you've got you know, a workforce which just, you know, doesn't reflect the demographic, or doesn't reflect, for example, even like the graduates that are coming out of the law schools in the city. Is that enough to almost like demonstrate that there is disadvantage to those groups, such that you can then have some sort of like, you know, scheme or internship that targets a group?
Yes, I mean, you really are looking at, you know, the kind of, you're looking, it's a litmus test. You're sort of looking at what does this place of work look like in the context of the environment that it sits in and that particular industry. So, for example, there's some industries where it's very difficult, say STEM areas, tech areas. So you can do probably a lot of work on many of the protected characteristics in those particular areas, because we know there's just a lot of disparity. So you are looking at, you want to anchor it in what those particular numbers, statistics are. Do you have to have, the most complex analysis at your fingertips? Not necessarily, but you need to be able to show it broadly. And then as long as you're taking steps which are proportionate and you're not going into the positive discrimination zone, you are going to be
and probably just being able to demonstrate that you've done the work. Do you know what I mean? So, if you've got a scheme or something, even just like a paper. I mean, I always talk about, using a business case anyway, almost, so for these initiatives, even if it's not about, cost benefit, but have you thought through, why are we doing this? What is the data telling us, etc. So if you bring that rigor to whatever it is that you're doing, and you've got it evidenced and you've shared it with the board and all of those things, which helps to deal with a lot of the negative press around these schemes anyway, doesn't it? And then everybody's really clear why it's being done, etc., and all of those things. So I mean, that makes a lot of sense.
Getting your ducks lined up, having a plan, going about this in a sensible, cohesive fashion is going to be, it's going to lead you towards success rather than just having a whim and just doing it willy-nilly. Not helpful at all. You need to be structured and plan.
Absolutely. One of the things, and I forgot to mention this in the pre-questions, but we obviously, especially on LinkedIn, and I referenced the States, where I think we're seeing there's probably even more noise about this, just because there's like the war on woke and all of that sort of thing, in the US. And often when we're on LinkedIn, which obviously, is mainly sort of, UK, US, Australia, Canada, etc., we often, we see a lot of the cases and we hear a lot of the rhetoric, and we hear terms like reverse discrimination. My understanding of affirmative action, which there has been a lot of debate around in the US, is that that's probably closer to positive discrimination. Am I right in thinking that?
It is. And of course, the laws in America are more robust because of their particular historical experience. So they were segregated openly segregated, and and subjugated out of particular opportunities for years and years and years, expressly, rather than so it was brought in to deal with that,
to remedy
it. And so it's different, and it's much more like what we would say is positive discrimination.
Absolutely. Right. And the other country, and I was working with a client who's got a location in South Africa. So the other country, again, maybe sort of similar to, when you look at the history of South Africa and apartheid and all of that, again, they have got, employment legislation that really is just trying to rebalance what was a very, very unfair system. So that's the key takeaway. I think sometimes when we see those conversations on LinkedIn, or we hear some of the sentiments, sometimes I look at, okay, where is this person posting from? Because I then understand actually there's a slightly different frame of reference, all of the debates in the Supreme Court about affirmative action and all of that.
Exactly. Context is key.
Context is key.
Everything. Absolutely. And so what works in what is proportionate in one environment is not going to be proportionate in another. So
absolutely,
one size doesn't fit all. And the other thing to bear in mind with the whole DEI debate is that culture change takes time, and it also creates a ripple effect. So it's often, and I'm sure you feel like 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards, or even 2 steps backwards. There is often this push and pull, because people can respond negatively to change.
Absolutely.
Even when it's good.
And especially when it's, they feel that they are being disadvantaged, or that their children are being disadvantaged, or people like them. So I think some of what we're seeing is literally just, it's that human thing, it's the whole tribal thing, it's all of that. We've got a question here from Akul Sharma. Good morning, Akul. Can you share examples of what the disparities you have seen or come across for STEM and tech that you just mentioned. So perhaps some examples around disadvantage and or underrepresentation in terms of STEM and tech.
I can't think of a specific example off the top of my head, but I do know, just from having quite a lot of connections in that field, and been involved in aspects of it, that it is an area generally where there are fewer women involved, and there are more projects to get women and girls involved in tech and STEM to try and get the pipeline improved for coming through.
I think the stats, I think there are definitely stats. If I can pull some stats out, Akol, I'll put them in the comments afterwards, because I work with some organizations in tech, and I think I'm going to say, I might get it wrong, but I'm going to say it's definitely below 40%, on average, some lower. So some areas of STEM are much lower, particularly, say, for example, engineering, because that's quite broad, but it is significantly low. And I think even in girls in STEM, so actually STEM is kind of a complex one, but I think that's why we see, for example, even like the government initiatives around girls in STEM, because there's definitely a drop off when it comes to like uni courses and all that. Things are probably changing, it's probably changing, but the pipeline,
Exactly, but without concerted effort, that change is going to be so much longer. And I think that's an example of one of the deep-rooted inequalities I talked about in that area, that in that industry generally.
Absolutely, and also, just to flip it as well, Akol, I think in terms of what I'd actually like to see more of, and it's something I talk about when it comes to boys and men, we're now starting to talk about HEAL, which is the industries where men and boys are underrepresented, right? So getting more men and boys into healthcare, education, literature, etc. I can't remember what the A stands for. Somebody else will know.
Is it arts?
It could be, or is it administrative? I can't remember. It might be art. It might be arts, But there's definitely, there's a flip side where we've got underrepresentation of men in certain sectors, and actually, a lot of people saying we should. I mean, I sat on an NHS board, and I was like, where's the program to get more men into healthcare? Where's the program to do that, to get more men into nursing, for example? Jill's some stats. Thank you so much, Jill. About 20% women, and as low as 6% for Black women in STEM.
I wouldn't be surprised.
So there you go, Akol. Thanks very much for that, Jill. And then we talked about how to tell the difference between the two. Just any advice that you've got, I guess. We've talked about some of the practical things in terms of really lining your ducks up. Any advice for organisations that maybe have got some initiatives on the go currently that they're doing around recruitment and promotion as well? We didn't talk so much about promotion. Is there anything that we should think about specifically in terms of promotion? So in terms of internal promotions or schemes?
Absolutely. I think with promotion, obviously it's very, very broad, but you might want to look at things like mentorship, training schemes that are preparing people for particular promotions, or you certainly can do that. That can be part of it. And then obviously with the promotion, you need to understand, what does it look like? Because in many organizations, you're going to get much more diversity in the lower tier. And then as you go up to the higher levels, the glass ceiling kicks in. So if you have got that disparity, you are probably in a place where you could apply the tie break if they are equal. So you can help them in terms of preparation, training, monitoring, all of that, mentoring, all of that is fine. All employers should be doing that anyway, really. They should be making sure that there's structured mentoring programs in place and things like that for particular underrepresented groups to nurture talent. And then if they are being assessed and they are equal, and you can show that there's equality between the candidates, then you may appoint the one from the underrepresented group.
Yeah.
To have that evidential basis to support it.
Is it harder? And I know I keep banging on about this disadvantage. Is it harder to prove disadvantage once people are in an organization, right? Because obviously, I guess when it comes to recruitment, you can look at generally the underrepresentation, you know, for example, within that industry, within that sector, within that firm. Once individuals are in a firm, and we're talking now about how they progress up the ladder, is it harder for that disadvantage test? Like, how do you know what I mean? What does that look like? Is it okay to say, oh, because there is underrepresentation at a senior level, therefore there is disadvantage? Is it? Do you know what I mean? That feels quite tricky.
It can get more tricky as you're going up and up, but I think it is about showing that there is a disparity. You know, there's a disproportionality in that ecosystem. So in that industry, in that workplace, in that area, when you compare, say, the working population or the demographic within that workplace, if you can show that there is underrepresentation, then you can generally show there's a disadvantage. So you know, the two are going together, but they do need to be supported by the data. The data.
And I get. Yeah, and data. I know, for example, in some organizations where they've got good data, it's showing things like, you know, we sometimes hear of the term broken rungs, you know, so showing where, you know, people with good skills and good, you know, for example, performance evaluations are still not being promoted, you know, and it's difficult. It's not obvious why. To me, that, you know, if you're doing that work and you're like, for some reason, you know, certain people from certain backgrounds or with disabilities, whatever, just aren't coming through the ranks, then you are demonstrating, you know, that there is disadvantage and something needs to be done. I mean, what's really interesting, you know, a lot of the questions I've been asking, we're going to talk about, you know, for organizations that are struggling, they may be worried about what they're doing. You know, what would your advice be to people that have got schemes, maybe, and maybe they're hearing a little bit of noise internally about saying, you know, is that lawful? Are we doing reverse discrimination? What should they do to kind of, you know, do they need to do like a belt and braces kind of review of things?
I think so. I think a review, I think trying to educate their workforce to really understand and get some buy-in from them about what the benefits are of diversity in the workplace. We take it for granted, but sometimes we need to be reminded. You know, we have got a lot of evidence, a lot of data. You know, McKinsey, Harvard have talked about it for years, about the fact that the more diverse an organization, the more innovative, the more you're going to attract and retain your high caliber candidates. That's going to lead to an increase in your balance sheet, without doubt, and have more innovative problem solving, you know, just more dynamism generally. And that's where people want to work. So it's a win-win situation. And the problem is, recently the conversation's been hijacked by this net zero argument, which comes from a very insecure, uneducated, quite frankly, and unsupported by data place. And and it's very loud and noisy. And I think that can put people off something that they're already feeling a little bit nervous about. So I think sometimes they need to just recalibrate, re-educate, just take some time out just to kind of engage with your employee network groups. And just trying to take some soundings. And just kind of say, look, this is what it's about. Go back to one.
Yeah, I love what you said there about kind of, you know, reinforcing the business case or looking at how you're even communicating it. So, you know, are you really clearly communicating the wins, the benefits, the sells of diversity and inclusion in terms of, you know, creating an environment where people can be themselves, which, as I always say, inclusion is a win-win for everybody. Like, everybody wants an environment where they can just be themselves, where they don't have the pressure to turn up and be, you know, somebody else. So there is something about, you know, having that right culture and maybe more education around around, you know, this topic of positive action, positive discrimination. The one thing I'm going to say as well, and you mentioned employee networks, the one thing I keep saying as well, and you talked about net zero, and it's not net zero. D&I is not net zero. I want to see, if you're watching this and you don't have a men's network for straight men, I want to see more men's networks. You know, I want D&I to include the needs of men. At the intersections, you know, D&I should feel as though everybody should feel as though they're benefiting from D&I. I know there's a different case to those that are in the global majority, if we use that term, and or women and or people with disabilities or other protected characteristics, but there is a benefit for all. And I think almost sometimes just by the optics of not having, for example, you know, a men's network, it's seen as though D&I is something that just protects the minorities over there, just helps them, but doesn't help others. Do you know what I mean? So there's something about getting the buy-in.
Yeah, I think almost. I think what I would say is to encourage people to join those groups. So what, because it's named that group doesn't mean it's excluding men. In fact, the opposite. My view is, well, allyship is so powerful. It's so fundamental. Mentorship and allyship joined together is such a powerful thing in the workplace. And so you want to bring people with you. You want men to be having a seat at the table too.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
That they can bring that allyship, mentorship, sponsorship to actually see change and create change. So I look at it that way. I think we want it to be, these groups are good, but they can also include, you know, and it may be like a special day where they include it, or they may just generally include men. But I think we need to look at that being more inclusive.
Absolutely.
The question that Sophia put about how can we answer a different question? How can we enrich our company instead of how just increase the number of women, etc.? This binary thing. I think that's the point as well. If we switch it around and say, look, we are enriching the tapestry, you know, the diversity, then it's, again, we're going to get, hopefully create more buy-in and ownership for everybody.
Because there's that thing. I think, Sophia, what you've hit the nail on the head, actually, when it comes to, you know, when it comes to good sales, and actually when you're influencing people, what you're doing is sales. You're selling them an idea, and good sales is you sell the transformation, you sell the result. You don't sell the thing. So D&I is the thing to get to, you know, a richer company, a more, you know, a place that's nicer to work, a place that attracts top talent, all of that sort of thing. Instead of, as you say, Sophia, instead of saying, you know, how can we get more women on the board or whatever, which sometimes is the how. That's the how to get to the end result. Elaine, thank you so much for this. I feel as though we could have gone on for much longer, but hopefully we've left people with a lot of information. Obviously, you know, if people want, I mean, I've certainly been encouraging some leadership teams to, as you were saying, Elaine, do that belt and braces review and potentially getting an expert in, you know, like somebody like Elaine, somebody with an employment law background to come in. You know, if you're worried, to like come in and have a look at your initiatives. And maybe even do like a, you know, a summary, or, you know, speak to the board that sort of says, you know, this is fine, you know, you've maybe got some risk here or whatever it might be, just to kind of give that reassurance and get your leadership team fully bought in, fully on the bus, so that they're not suddenly, you know, putting the brakes on things, because that's the worst, I think, when you see initiatives suddenly pulled, or, you know, things start getting slowed down. So Elaine, any final words from you? Any final thoughts?
Absolutely. I want to encourage people, you know, employers, leaders, to really engage with this and not to be too afraid. Like you say, if they're concerned, get some advice, maybe have a review, know where the land lies and get it sorted, you know, just understand the whole kind of environment and ecosystem, and then look at it, you know, because this could be a really powerful, useful tool to utilize in a proportionate manner.
Yeah, absolutely. That's amazing. Elaine, thank you so much. And to everybody that that has listened live as well, thank you for joining us on your Friday morning. Hopefully it's been a really thought-provoking start to the weekend. And if you're watching on the replay. Thanks again for taking some time out to listen to this. And you know, if anybody's got any questions or queries, please, you know, put them in the chat or reach out directly to Elaine over at 7BR. 7BR's your chambers, isn't it?
Yes,
Is that
that's
right?
right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Perfect. Amazing. Elaine, thank you again so much.
Thank you for having me, Cheryl. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for listening. I'll see you next time.
Bye.